I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council. Hi again, friends. Chris Edwards, back with David Glenn in year 2 of our quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. On our weekly show here in 2024, DG and I are going to mostly look ahead to the upcoming week's college football matchups, but we're also going to discuss college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments in the schedule the previous week. DG, now in his 38th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. DG, always good to be with you, my friend.
Great to be with you, Chris. We have a lot of fun stuff to discuss, some of it positive, some of it negative, so let's dive right in.
Absolutely. We, of course, are going to get to NC State and Appalachian State and those debacles last week at the hands of Clemson and Tennessee, respectively. But there's several other in-state teams that are off to really good 2-0 starts. So let's look ahead to this week's action. A few very important storylines involving teams in North Carolina here in week 3. This segment brought to you by our good friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, now with more than 25 years serving our North Carolina communities. They've grown to 6 locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more at AtlanticTireOnline.com. All right, DG, game 1, Louisiana Tech, they're 1-0 at 1-1 NC State, Saturday noon on ACC Network. The Wolfpack, big 21-point favorites in this game.
Yeah, it's going to be hard, Chris, as you know, for a large chunk of that Wolfpack fan base to turn the page on last week's embarrassing 51-10 loss to number 14 Tennessee. But that's exactly what the Wolfpack players and coaches are going to have to do, starting with this game against Louisiana Tech, because plenty of the Pack's goals, as crazy as it might sound after that debacle, remain within reach. The hardest to digest part of State's faceplant in Charlotte was that the Wolfpack was absolutely dominated in the trenches in that game, something that really hasn't happened often to Dave Doran's teams during his 12 years in Raleigh. Tennessee ran the ball a lot and well. State couldn't run the ball even a little. Tennessee protected its star quarterback very well. State definitely did not do that. I do think the Volunteers were just more talented overall, obviously, but with the exception of Clemson, remember, the Wolfpack won't have that sort of major talent disadvantage against any other opponent during the remainder of this regular season. Now, the Wolfpack's next steps forward must include much better play from the quarterback Grayson McCall, who so far has looked more like the embattled Coastal Carolina quarterback of 2023 rather than that 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year. There's no doubt that McCall has enough weapons around him at NC State, starting with the stud wide receiver Casey Concepcion, continuing with the UConn transfer at tight end Justin Jolie. That means it is up to that offensive line, which has been a strength for Coach Doran for most of his tenure. Left tackle Anthony Belton's a good player. The Notre Dame transfer center Zeke Carrell is a good player. They're quality building blocks up front, but they need more help from their friends, as the old saying goes, to both protect Grayson McCall and to open up more holes for guys like Jordan Waters, who, remember, was an all-ACC running back at Duke, but ended up with 7 carries for a total of negative yardage against the Volunteers. On defense, meanwhile, and this has to start changing against Louisiana Tech on Saturday, someone in the front 6 or 7 has to become an impactful player. Nobody expects you to be Peyton Wilson, now in this NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers. However, there has to be one or more guys that make the opponent's quarterback and running back and offensive line nervous. Could be Davin Vann or somebody else on the line. Could be Caden Fordham or Sean Brown or someone else at linebacker. We know Aiden White is a great player in that secondary. And we also know that Louisiana Tech last week struggled with an FCS opponent in its opening game. So this should be exactly the sort of foe that enables the Wolfpack to get back on track, and it has to start right there in the trenches.
All right, let's turn our focus to our second game. Appalachian State 1-1 off that big loss against Clemson. They're on the road again this week at East Carolina. Pirates are 2-0. This is a 4:00 game on Saturday, ESPNU. Appalachian State, a 2-point favorite in this contest.
Yeah, first, I think it's important to put the records in perspective here. App State, remember, beat an FCS opponent and then lost to Clemson in Death Valley, as many would. ECU's 2 wins are over an FCS opponent and then a close one at Old Dominion, which is not expected to be among the Sun Belt Conference contenders this year. In other words, nothing unexpectedly bad has happened for either the Pirates or the Mountaineers so far, but nothing particularly special has happened yet either. To me, this matchup is interesting in part because these are 2 of our 7 FBS programs here in North Carolina, but they've actually played each other as FBS members only twice. Last year, the Mountaineers won 43-28 in Boone. We were there with our old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus for that one. And 3 years ago, when the same 2 teams faced off in Charlotte, the Mountaineers won 33-19. So now we finally get the matchup of these 2 proud programs in Greenville. The reason I like App State in this game is that I think, despite what happened against Clemson, App State knows that it could be a special team again this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball, with a proven QB in Joey Aguilar at the controls and very talented skill players around him. Anderson Castle and Kanye Roberts at running back, Caden Robinson and Christian Horn at wideout, Eli Wilson at tight end and otherwise. What will be interesting is that while the ECU coaches can't possibly be sure what they'll get from their offense, which is definitely improved from last year's disaster, but also turnover prone and wildly unpredictable, the Pirates really do like their defense again this year. It was pretty good a year ago. Mike Houston said he expects it to be even better this year on that side of the ball. And so far, that defense has delivered. Chad Stevens, Deontay Johnson, Elijah Morris, they're really tough up front. Zakai Barker and Mike Edwards III have been really strong at linebacker. And the cornerback, Savone Revel, is the star of that secondary. The harder to predict aspect of this game between the Mountaineers and the Pirates, by far to me, will occur when the Pirates have the ball. ECU's running back, Rajay Harris, is a really good player, and he was the offensive star of that victory at ODU. However, the new Pirates quarterback, Jake Garcia, we've talked about him for a few weeks in a row now, formerly of the Miami Hurricanes, formerly of the Missouri Tigers. He's been both making plays in the positive sense to guys like Anthony Smith, who's a former NC State player who didn't play much during his 4 years with the Wolfpack, but is breaking through for the Pirates, and Winston Wright Jr., who was once a star at West Virginia, but didn't play a whole lot the last 2 years at Florida State. He's getting his chance in Greenville, and he's making some plays. But Jake Garcia has also thrown an NCAA worst 7 interceptions through 2 games, and that means Caton Hauser, a Michigan State transfer, also a quarterback, could get a look if Garcia keeps throwing the ball to the other team. The bottom line to me, App State is a more confident and slightly more talented football team than ECU is right now. And if it's a close game, I think the Mountaineers' advantage at quarterback probably will make the difference.
All right, game 3 on our look ahead this week. Number 5, Ole Miss, coming to ACC country. They're in Winston-Salem. Ole Miss 2-0, taking on 1-1 Wake Forest. 6:30 on Saturday on the wildly popular CW. The Rebels, a 23-point favorite in this contest.
Yeah, Chris, this game is both exciting and scary for Wake Forest. It's exciting because the Demon Deacons do not have many victories over top 10 opponents, and I mean in the history of their football program. And, of course, Coach Lane Kiffin's Rebels do come to town with that number 5 national ranking. So by that standard, it would be one of the biggest regular season wins for the Deacons, certainly in their 71-year history as Atlantic Coast Conference members, if they can somehow pull it off on Saturday evening. The scary part is because Ole Miss has played 2 games And the Rebels have defeated their opponents by scores of 76-0. That was Furman, which is a pretty good FCS program, and 52-3. That was Middle Tennessee State. It is also scary because Wake has some significant questions on the defensive side of the ball, and the Rebels have one of the most prolific quarterbacks in all of college football in a guy named Jackson Dart. Dart in week 1 threw for 400-plus yards in the first half, and in week 2, he set the all-time Southeastern Conference record for consecutive completions. He threw the ball 36 consecutive times and completed it 36 consecutive times. We would have a hard time doing that on the beach, even if there were no defenders and it wasn't a particularly windy day. 36 straight completions, most in SEC football history. That's Jackson Dart. As you might imagine, the NFL is interested in Dart as well. After starting his career at Southern Cal, he's in his 3rd year as the Ole Miss starter, and he has 49 touchdown passes against 16 interceptions during his time with the Rebels so far. I do think Wake's offense will give Ole Miss by far its biggest test of the season. Hank Bachmeier is a 6th-year college player and a really smart QB for the Deacs. He started a lot of games at Boise State, last year at Louisiana Tech. He's off to a good start for the Deacs and now does have the starting job. Threw for 400 yards against UVA last week, although obviously it was not in a winning effort in that regard. Donovan Green and Taylor Morin make up, I think, one of the better receiving tandems in the ACC. And if you haven't seen Damon Claiborne, the Deacs running back, he's a really, really, really good player. We'll see how Wake's blocking holds up against an SEC defensive front. That didn't go so well for the Wolfpack against Tennessee. And I have no idea how Dave Clawson's defense is going to slow down that Ole Miss offense. As I said, it's both an exciting and a scary matchup that awaits us in Winston-Salem on Saturday night.
Dart, what a name for a quarterback, too.
Yeah.
Right? Throwing some darts out there. Finally, in this segment, what maybe other in-state games are worth perhaps more of a brief mention this week, and why do you think that?
Yeah, I'd say, too, real quickly, NC Central visits a 2-0 North Carolina team, and UConn visits a 2-0 Duke team. The bottom line in both is that the Heels and the Devils are the better team than their opponent. They have a great chance to get to 3-0 in what they both hope will be bowl seasons. The Tar Heels have even higher expectations than merely getting to a bowl, but they both have extremely inexperienced quarterbacks, right? Malik Murphy at Duke, the backup, now elevated to starter, Connor Harrell, after the injury to Max Johnson. Murphy was good against Northwestern at the most important times. We'll talk more about that later as the Devils beat the Wildcats a week ago. Harrell was good enough, but far from perfect, as the Heels beat Charlotte last week in Chapel Hill. But they both have a lot of growing to do. They both need more time with their offensive line on cadence calls, more chemistry with their wide receivers, and even with their running backs on things as simple as handoffs. They need to be higher efficiency, lower mistake quarterbacks if the Devils and the Heels are going to get where they need to go. And against these opponents, NC Central and UConn, they have a chance to kind of iron out some of those wrinkles as the schedule gets a little tougher for both Carolina and Duke down the road.
All right, we'll be back with more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by our friends at the North Carolina Pork Council. In just a moment, you're watching here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be with DG. And DG, let's dive right into our ACC and National Week 3 look ahead. That's brought to you by our great friends at Excel Moving and Storage, family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina, with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with your storage needs. Learn more at excelms.com. That's Excel Moving and Storage. RDG, only 2 top 25 versus top 25 matchups in Week 3's national schedule. And as it works out, one of them is in the ACC. So let's start right there. Number 24, Boston College. The Eagles 2-0, which includes that win at Florida State, on the road against another top 10 team at number 6, Missouri. 12:45 Saturday on SEC Network. Missouri, a double-digit point favorite in this contest.
Yeah, Boston College, under their first-year head coach Bill O'Brien, has entered that national top 25 for the first time since 2018. They shocked Florida State, as you mentioned, in Tallahassee, and then they absolutely drubbed their FCS opponent Duquesne in Week 2. Missouri, remember, is in its 5th season under the former NC State offensive coordinator and former App State head coach Eli Drinkwitz, and the Tigers are ranked number 6 nationally coming into this one. After 3 mediocre seasons to start his tenure in the SEC, Drinkwitz last year, remember, led Missouri to an 11-2 record, a Cotton Bowl victory, and a number 8 final ranking in the national polls 1 year ago. And there are obviously sky-high expectations for his Tigers again this season. Brady Cook, if you haven't seen him, of Missouri, is a really accurate passer. Thomas Castellanos, of course, of Boston College, we've seen more of. He's one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the ACC. He's a little guy, but he can really, really run, and he looks improved as a passer so far this year as well. Also on the Eagles offense, there's a running back, Trayshawn Ward, formerly of Florida State and Kansas State. So far behind a big, strong offensive line, he's making the most of maybe his biggest opportunity as a college player. He's in his 6th year, and he may be breaking through for the Eagles as we speak. In BC's 28-13 win at Florida State, the Eagles ran the ball 52 times for 263 yards. That'll take a little pressure off of your quarterback, right? The Eagles average, they call themselves O-line U. They average 300-plus pounds across that front 5 in the trenches, and it's made up of mostly 4th and 5th-year seniors up there. If they're going to have a chance to spring the upset at Missouri, they're going to have to run the ball. They're going to have to eat the clock, and then they're going to have to complement that running game with a little bit of that Thomas Castellanos dual threat magic. I don't expect it to happen, but I didn't expect the Eagles to go to Tallahassee and beat the Seminoles either.
Well, speaking of Florida State, they're home in Tallahassee this week, 0-2 for Mike Norvell's squad. They're hosting a 2-0 Memphis team out of the American Conference, noon on Saturday on ESPN. Florida State, just an 8-point favorite in this game.
Yeah. In this one, let me just first remind everybody of a crazy fun fact regarding this year's Seminoles and their infamous 0-2 start. I assume people who write on the Florida State beat have already delved into this. I would hope so, at least. But to me, it's the starting point to understand what has happened so far for Mike Norvell. There are 11 players, Chris, from last year's ACC champion Florida State roster that are currently on National Football League rosters. And 9 of those 11 are on the 53-man active roster, like the guys trotting out there as professional rookies on Sundays and otherwise. 9 of the 11 are on that roster, not the practice squad or any of the reserved lists. It is an insane number of NFL rookies from any single college team. Many in the ACC have 0 rookies on NFL rosters right now. The Seminoles have 11. It's also a reminder that it's really difficult to replace elite talents and highly productive players like a Jordan Travis at QB, Trey Benson at running back, Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson at wideout, Braden Fisk and Jared Verse on the defensive line, Tatum Bethune at linebacker, Renardo Green and Jerry and Jones in the secondary. All of those guys helped the Seminoles get to 12-0 last year before that playoff disappointment. We won't go back there. All of them are on NFL rosters as we speak. Unless you're talking about the old Bobby Bowden era at Florida State or the Nick Saban era at Alabama, or maybe nowadays the Kirby Smart era at Georgia, there's usually going to be a step back or an adjustment period at the least when you send that many NFL caliber talents to the next level in a single year. There is, for perspective, there is an ACC program that has 11 total NFL players right now. That means that could be products from 20 years ago, 15 years ago, or last year's team. 11 total NFL players. FSU has that many NFL players just from last year's squad. That has to be felt at a grassroots level, and I think that's part of what's happening, at least in Tallahassee right now. Also, real quick, this game is interesting because Memphis is supposed to be one of the very best teams in the American Athletic Conference this year, and the Tigers have started the season 2-0, as you mentioned, and in convincing fashion. So it's not exactly a cupcake visiting Tallahassee on Saturday afternoon. Remember how nervous everybody got at Doak Campbell when that game got off to a rough start for the Seminoles? Well, surprisingly, after head coach Mike Norvell said he might have the best offensive line of his entire FSU tenure, he said that back in the preseason. As we saw against the Eagles, that group is not off to a good start, nor against Georgia Tech in the opener over in Ireland. And the defensive front at FSU hasn't been anything special so far either. That'll be the first place to look for improvement this week against Memphis. Again, a quality American Athletic Conference team. If the Seminoles don't improve in the trenches, that doesn't give DJ Uiagalelei, the quarterback, and the rest of the skill players the room and the breathing space that they need to strut their stuff. So if there's a face plan or anything close to it this week, we're going to hear a lot more about how FSU has had a mediocre football program for 5 straight years, 2017 through 2021, before breaking through with those top 10 teams these last 2 years. I don't think FSU will start 0-3, but if it happens, those will be the headlines, and those will be some of the reasons why.
All right, let's talk about an old ACC matchup that's now a non-conference game. 1-1 Maryland in Charlottesville taking on 2-0 Virginia. This is Saturday night, 8 o'clock, ACC Network. Maryland, a 2-point favorite in this contest.
Yeah, to me, this is a fun one to consider just for a couple reasons. First, these two teams did play each other first in 1919, and then they later played each other almost every year for about 6 straight decades when they were, as you said, fellow members of the ACC. This is just these two programs' second meeting since the Terps took off for the Big Ten after the 2013 season, with Maryland winning that single matchup in College Park last year. That was 42-14 in favor of the Terps. Secondly, thanks in part to his team's close win at Wake Forest last week, the third-year UVA coach, Tony Elliott, remember he was a former wide receiver for the Clemson Tigers, former offensive coordinator under Dabo Swinney at Clemson. Coach Elliott has his first real shot at a breakthrough season. He went 3-7 in his first year at UVA. He went 3-9 last year, simply didn't have enough talent to compete. Everyone in Charlottesville is simply asking for improvement this season, perhaps in the form of a bowl game. Well, with the young quarterback Anthony Calandria jump-starting that UVA offense of Coach Elliott, both with Calandria's creative play and a sky-high energy level that he plays with, the Cavaliers are off to a 2-0 start with at least a chance to get to 3-0 against a Maryland team that's picked to finish kind of in the lower middle of the Big Ten. So you're saying there's a chance, they're saying in Charlottesville right now. That's a step in the right direction, at least for the Cavaliers, and a really big step if the Wahoos can get to 3-0.
All right, we'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council, coming up in just a moment on the North Carolina Sports Network.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council. Chris Edwards, great to be back with DG. All right, DG, diving right into our coaches and quarterbacks segment. That's brought to you by our good friends at Lawson Insurance, who are about to celebrate their 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken Miller and Michael Lawson. Like us, they're all huge sports fans. Give them a call, 919-846-2090, or just search Lawson Insurance online. Okay, here we go, DG. Which in-state quarterback or quarterbacks impressed you most last week and why?
Well, I'd say that 4 of our state's 7 starting quarterbacks would like to forget last week, Chris. Max Brown of Charlotte was knocked out of the UNC game with a hand injury. ECU's Jake Garcia leads the nation in interceptions, although he did get the Pirates a win last week. Grayson McCall of NC State played maybe the worst game of his entire life against Tennessee and Charlotte. And App State's Joey Aguilar completed less than half of his passes against the Clemson Tigers in Death Valley. The other 3 in-state FBS starters, including Hank Bachmeyer at Wake Forest, throwing for more than 400 yards in the Demon Deacons' loss to UVA, and UNC's Connor Harrell, the elevated backup who made some impressive plays with his legs and his arm in the Tar Heels' win over Charlotte. Those guys took steps forward, large or small, but the most impressive to me was Duke's Malik Murphy, the Texas transfer, and here's why. I can't even say that Murphy, and I watched the whole game against Northwestern as Duke traveled to Evanston, I can't even say Murphy played great for the Devils there. He too often throws the ball into double teams or other trouble areas, which was one of the reasons, remember, that he did fall to 3rd on the depth chart with the Texas Longhorns. But nothing in this world matters, in the college football world, I mean, more than being the difference between your team getting a win and a loss. And Murphy was absolutely at his best in overtime and double overtime against Northwestern in the Blue Devils' 26-20 victory. Duke scored only 13 points in regulation up at Evanston, and as expected, the Devils had trouble running the ball. At one point in regulation, after Murphy made a couple of boneheaded throws, the head coach at Duke, Manny Diaz, even sent in the backup, Henry Beelan IV. However, in overtime, after really letting his team down in regulation, Duke ended up with 2 possessions in overtime, and Murphy produced 2 remarkable touchdowns. The first, with the game on the line because Northwestern had already scored a touchdown on its first OT possession, was a perfect Malik Murphy 25-yard strike down the middle to the veteran wide receiver Jordan Moore. It was on Duke's first play of that first OT period. Perfect play call, perfect execution, perfect throw. It was not, by the way, a catch and run play. It was one of those where Murphy drops back and is sitting in the middle of a well-protected pocket, probably at the 35-yard line with the snap starting at the 25. By the time he let it go, he's at the 35, and his receiver, Jordan Moore, caught it in the end zone. So it was probably 40 yards in the air, and it was the dart, as you mentioned earlier. It was a big-time throw. Then, on the game-winning TD, Murphy had to make one of those throws from the 3-yard line after another very good throw to Jordan Moore to get them down to the 3. It was one of those where you're basically throwing the ball to a well-covered receiver's back shoulder near the sideline, in this case, the left sideline, in the end zone. So the receiver this time was the veteran Eli Pancol, and both the accuracy and the timing of Murphy's throw were perfect. Pancol came out of his break, he looked for the ball, and there it was, right there as designed. Either Pancol was going to catch that ball on his back shoulder for the touchdown, which he did, or Duke was going to have an incompletion and another chance or two from the Northwestern 3-yard line. That was an offensive coordinator's dream right there. On Duke's 2 offensive possessions in overtime, Murphy was pretty much perfect after all those mistakes in regulation. And that kind of persistence and timely clutch play, along with great defense from Duke throughout that ball game, is why the Blue Devils were able to come back to Durham with that shiny 2-0 record.
All right, we've talked about in-state quarterbacks here. What about ACC quarterbacks as a whole? Who impressed you most last week and why?
Yeah, there's a bunch of good candidates, but I'll just give you 2. Cade Klubnik of Clemson and Kyle McCord of Syracuse. That's my all orange, all the time answer for you. Klubnik played by far the best game of his 3 years at Clemson. And he did it 1 week, remember, after being shut down and even embarrassed on national TV by those #1 Georgia Bulldogs, which led many in Clemson's own fan base to revisit those questions about Klubnik and about Coach Dabo Swinney's loyalty to the former prep star. I don't think I've ever seen 8 touchdown drives on 8 first-half possessions, but that is what the Tigers did to App State in Death Valley on Saturday night, and Klubnik was one of the big reasons why. The score was 56-13 at halftime. Klubnik got it all started with a perfect 73-yard throw to freshman receiver Bryant Wesco, hitting him in stride on the 3rd offensive snap of the game for the Tigers. In the end, Klubnik had only 2 incompletions on the entire night. He finished an almost robotic 24 for 26 for 378 passing yards and 5 TD passes before giving way to his backups in the second half against the Mountaineers. It was a truly brilliant performance by a guy who, remember, was considered by some the #1 high school quarterback in America back in 2021, but also someone who, of course, has not yet lived up to that hype consistently during his first 2 years with the Tigers or in that Georgia game. We'll see where he goes from here, but that was a sensational performance by Klubnik in Death Valley on Saturday. The other guy, Kyle McCord of Syracuse, he meanwhile leads the ACC in total offense right now at 372 yards per game, and he has the Orange out to a 2-0 start after transferring in, remember, from Ohio State during the offseason. It is easy to forget, but Kyle McCord had a stellar 12-1 record as the starting quarterback for the Buckeyes after getting stuck behind C.J. Stroud for a couple of years. And just last year, McCord had 24 touchdown passes and only 6 interceptions for the Buckeyes. This story is fairly well documented by now, but I'll share it with our audience anyway. The brand new Syracuse head coach, Fran Brown, met with Kyle McCord last December for, get this, 7 straight hours when he visited Kyle McCord's family home in New Jersey, not far from where Fran Brown, the Syracuse coach, grew up in the Camden area. So they have that in common, right? As it turns out, these parts of Jersey are real close to my original hometown of Philadelphia, so I know the region well. And McCord basically played high school ball across the river from where Fran Brown, young Fran Brown, played his own high school ball in Camden, New Jersey. Anyway, one more small world wrinkle to this story. Obviously, Fran Brown did convince Kyle McCord to leave, to pick Syracuse, I should say, after deciding to leave Ohio State. Coach Fran Brown's wife once worked with Kyle McCord's dad at a local hospital in the greater Philadelphia area. That's small world if I've ever seen it on the recruiting trail or otherwise. Brown convinces McCord to be a centerpiece of Brown's first season with the Orange. Like a Cam Ward of Miami, who we talked a lot about last week, McCord plays with a lot of confidence, a lot of swagger, and he's showing that he too can make a lot of NFL-type throws that probably half the starting QBs in the ACC just cannot make and are usually not asked to make. In the Orange's 31-28 victory over, remember, what was at the time a top 25 Georgia Tech team on Saturday, McCord threw for almost 400 yards and 4 touchdowns with 0 turnovers. He hit the star tight end, Aronde Gadsden II, for 2 scores, and he hit the veteran wideout Trevor Pena for 2 more scores. All 4 of those scoring throws, if you go back and look at them, required a really high level of accuracy. These were not 10-yard away screen passes. All 4 were downfield or on the sidelines, and all 4 were right on the money from Kyle McCord. That is a really good sign for Syracuse in year 1 under Fran Brown.
All right, let's use another timeout. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council, in just a moment on the North Carolina Sports Network. In 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Port Council here on the North Carolina Sports Network. All right, DG, as most folks know by now, the focus of our show on This Week in College Football will be forward-looking as often as possible. We are going to take a glance back at the previous week, though, in college football, in part because DG finds intriguing angles and offers unique observations and historical perspectives that really you can't get anywhere else. So with that thought in mind, we bring you our quick glance back to last week, brought to you by our good friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, live music 365 days a year, and right next door, you'll find King Neptune that has become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. Keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. Week 2, some intriguing developments, DG, including that big 51-10 win for Tennessee over NC State in Charlotte. Clemson with that 66-20 just destruction of App State and Death Valley. Meanwhile, 3 FBS teams in our state, North Carolina, Duke, and East Carolina, won games last week to get to 2-0. So all that in mind, which coaching staff or even fan base should be more alarmed or concerned after last week's big loss, App State or NC State?
Well, the short answer is NC State for a lot of different reasons, even though I would agree that both of those beatdowns came at the hands of really good teams. First, some background here, whereas this is year 5 for head coach Sean Clark at App State, this is year 12 for Dave Doeren at NC State. So the bar should be set in a higher place for Coach Doeren. Second, Coach Clark has had the Mountaineers in 2 of the last 3 Sun Belt Conference championship games, and the Wolfpack has never played in the ACC title game or even reached the 10-win plateau under Coach Doeren. Third, App State was playing a true road game at Clemson's Death Valley, one of the toughest places to play in all of college football, whereas the Wolfpack, yes, played a tough Tennessee team, but it was in Charlotte, a neutral site that's just a 3-hour drive from Raleigh, and Wolfpack Nation did show up in huge numbers to support its team in a really big way. Fourth, Coach Clark has already won 3 bowl games in his relatively short time in Boone, whereas Coach Doeren has not won any bowl games since 2017, and he's lost 4 straight postseason contests. I bring up this background because it's part of the reason there is more frustration from Wolfpack fans toward Coach Doeren than there is, best I can tell, from Mountaineers fans toward Coach Clark. One more thing, the 51-10 loss to Tennessee was the second worst by margin of defeat of Dave Doeren's 12 years in Raleigh, and it's the 4th time he's lost by 40 or more points. It happened twice against Clemson previously. It happened once against Louisville, and then obviously it happened against the Volunteers. The bottom line, I agree with the many NC State fans who say both that Dave Doeren deserves a lot of credit for creating a consistently successful program. He's taken the Wolfpack to 9 bowls in the last 10 years. He's had only 1 losing season since his first year in Raleigh back in 2013. And he's won 6 of his last 8 games head-to-head against the hated Tar Heels. He deserves credit for all those things. But many of those same fans, and again, I agree, will point out that Dave Doeren also deserves, on the downside, some criticism for failing to take the Wolfpack to that proverbial next level during these 12 years in Raleigh. Yes, it is accurate to say that Dave Doeren is the winningest coach in Wolfpack football history. However, it's also accurate to say, for example, that after 11-plus years in Raleigh now, Dave Doeren has still lost more conference games than he's won. It's 44 ACC victories against 46 ACC defeats. Also, after the Tennessee embarrassment, his record against top 25 opponents is now 7-24. Now, most coaches, to be clear, do have losing records against top 25 opponents. That's not unusual in itself. But 7-24 in those biggest games with some very ugly defeats like that one against Tennessee, that, of course, is going to leave the fans howling. Last thing on this, because it's still definitely too early, in my opinion, to kind of drive a stake through the Wolfpack's heart for the entire 2024 season, in part because the only remaining NC State opponent that will look anything like Tennessee's athletes is Clemson, a team the Pack actually has to face next week in Death Valley. That'll be brutally hard. But whereas App State still has Joey Aguilar as a brilliant QB for the remainder of the season, assuming good health, NC State can't be sure right now what it has with Coastal Carolina transfer Grayson McCall. We've said it before, but it's worth repeating. The easiest things to remember about Grayson are that he was a 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, and he's thrown for 10,000 plus career yards even before setting foot in Raleigh. Those are definitely two amazing accomplishments, right? However, it's also easy to forget last year was McCall's only mediocre year at Coastal. It is an uncommon career track. 3 phenomenal years followed by an injury-plagued mediocre year as a senior. In 2023, Grayson McCall at Coastal had only 10 touchdown passes against 6 interceptions, and he only won 4 of the 7 games he started for the Chanticleers last year. He was knocked out for the latter part of the season on one of those wicked-looking head-hunting plays on a quarterback slide where a defensive player just flat out speared him in the head. That was Grayson McCall's most recent on-the-field experience before his arrival in Raleigh. And then he looked nervous for much of that Western Carolina opener with the Wolfpack. He played horribly against Tennessee, didn't get much support, but was also bad himself. Only 104 yards passing, 3 turnovers, including a pick 6, in a game where the Pack's offense generated only 3 points. Remember, the other 7 came on a pick 6 by Aiden White of the Wolfpack. Those are among the many, many reasons I have far more questions about the Wolfpack than I have about the Mountaineers right now. App State could still have a very special season despite that butt kicking by Clemson. It is harder to foresee a truly special season for the Wolfpack, at least for now, until they get better in the trenches and they get better quarterback play from Grayson McCall or somebody else.
All right, what about the flip side of this coin? Now, 3 of our 7 teams, the FBS teams in North Carolina, have managed a perfect 2-0 start. I wonder which one, maybe between 2-0 North Carolina, 2-0 Duke, and 2-0 East Carolina, which one of those 3 teams has the highest ceiling this season?
Yeah, my short answer is UNC, Chris, but let me just point out a few things that all 3 of those 2-0 teams have in common. Number one, on the upside, all of these 3 teams already have a road win against an FBS opponent. UNC at Minnesota, Duke at Northwestern, ECU at Old Dominion. So props to all 3 schools for that. I know those road wins were close games, and I know they were against very beatable opponents, but as the old saying goes, a win is a win is a win, and road wins over FBS teams are not easy, so we'll take them. Number 2, all of those 3 teams' most difficult games are still ahead of them. So whereas I love the glass half full approach to life in most contexts, I would encourage nothing more than cautious optimism to all 3 fan bases, Carolina, Duke, and ECU right now, because none of those teams looks like a juggernaut. And finally, number 3, the quarterbacks at all 3 schools, Connor Harrell at UNC, Malik Murphy at Duke, Jake Garcia at ECU, and more generally, really the offenses at all 3 of those schools are works in progress that are really on very shaky foundations right now. All 3 quarterbacks are very inexperienced. Malik Murphy has 4 career starts, 2 at Texas, 2 at Duke. Harrell and Garcia have 3 career starts each. Actually, no, Garcia has 3. Harrell has the bowl game last year and then the win against the Charlotte 49ers last week. So what is that? A total of 9 career starts among the 3 of them. And all 3 are working behind below average to be nice offensive lines. That is almost always a recipe for inconsistency, as we've already seen in particular from Garcia throwing those 7 interceptions, again, most in the nation, just in his first 2 games with the Pirates. While I think all 3 teams have capable defenses that sometimes look really, really good and are even the number 1 reason the Pirates or the Devils or the Heels win a game, Carolina is probably the one team out of the 3 that has the best chance of maximizing their inexperienced quarterback's chance of success. And for the most part, the Tar Heels also have a very manageable schedule ahead. Not every game, but most. The Tar Heels, of course, Omarion Hampton is one of the best running backs in America. He was dinged up against Charlotte, but they expect him to be fine moving forward. His backup, the freshman Davion Goss, looked really good with 100-plus rushing yards against Charlotte. after Hampton's done that many, many times in his career. Carolina also has at least 2 high-quality tight ends when healthy in Bryson Nesbitt and John Copenhaver. And the Heels also have a bunch of very capable wide receivers in J.J. Jones, an upcoming guest on the David Glenn Show, Nate McCollum, Christian Hamilton, Kobe Paysour, Chris Culliver, and their really promising freshman, Jordan Shipp. If Connor Harrell can continue to make plays with his legs, where he's already pretty good, and gradually become a much more polished passer and work on his timing with his line, his timing with his receivers, and his accuracy with his throws, the Heels will be that much more prepared down the road when that much tougher ACC schedule begins, starting with a trip to Duke on the last Saturday of September. Speaking of Duke, Manny Diaz, another upcoming guest on the David Glenn Show. Final thought, Carolina and Duke both should improve to 3-0 this week. NC Central, great FCS program, but nowhere near the Heels in terms of talent. UConn, I believe, a cut below the Blue Devils as well. So good luck to the Devils and the Heels on getting to 3-0. Given that competition, it should happen. ECU's path to 3-0 obviously is a much more difficult request, with App State coming to Greenville on Saturday afternoon.
That's going to do it for this week in college football with David Glenn. A big thank you to our friends at the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. And thanks to Atlantic Tire and Service, our newest sponsor, now with 6 locations in the Triangle. A quick reminder, DG and his staff posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which also has direct links on the homepage to this YouTube channel, the wide variety of places you can get on-demand audio and podcasts of this show and the David Glenn Show, along with all of our other offerings and updates on year 2 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which will be visiting both North Carolina Central and Appalachian State just in the month of September. So for David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks for joining us for This Week in College Football with David Glenn right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.